How could entire villages stay warm in places where modern humans without technology would freeze to death in a single night? We tend to think that northern peoples simply endured the cold, but in fact they outsmarted it. Their settlements were designed as if winter were not a natural disaster, but an expected and controllable guest. Scandinavian builders turned snowdrifts into insulation and icy winds into a ventilation system. They had no central heating, but the temperature in their homes never dropped to critical levels. The secret was not in the thickness of the walls, but in an understanding of the laws of physics that we are rediscovering today. It was a real battle of engineering against the merciless nature of the Arctic. Each house was part of a single organism that breathed and retained heat, thanks to its unique layout. We will look at how the Vikings used the landscape to make the cold work for them. Watch the video to the end to find out how the shape of a roof could save a family from death, and why smoke in the room was a guarantee of health, rather than a cause of suffocation. What if I told you that everything you believed about the primitiveness of ancient dwellings is not true? The Viking longhouse was not just a shed, but a perfect wind tunnel designed to withstand storms. Its shape resembled an upside-down boat, not by accident, but by strict engineering calculation. The curved walls effectively deflected wind currents, reducing pressure on the structure during storms. Right angles in northern architecture would have been a death sentence for the building. Wind hitting a flat wall creates a zone of turbulence that cools the room in a matter of hours. The rounded shapes of the longhouse allowed the icy air to flow smoothly around the structure without taking away precious heat. This is a principle that is used today in the design of modern polar stations. The roof had a specially calculated angle of inclination that prevented snow from accumulating in dangerous quantities. However, the Vikings did not seek to completely clear the roof of snow. They knew that a layer of snow served as an excellent natural insulator. The snowcap retained heat inside the house, acting as an extra blanket. The interior of the house had no partitions, which ensured even circulation of warm air. Heat from the hearth rose and spread along the ridge of the roof, creating a thermal cushion. Cold air seeping in from the entrance was immediately heated and carried away by this flow. This convection prevented the formation of stagnant and damp areas in the corners. The support pillars inside the house were not installed on the ground, but on special stone foundations. This prevented the wood from rotting due to contact with damp soil and broke the cold bridges. The stone served as a thermal insulator, preventing the cold from the ground from rising up through the wood. Engineers of that time had a thorough understanding of the properties of materials. The entrance was always designed taking into account the windrows of the specific area. Doors were never located on the windward side to avoid direct exposure to cold air. Special vestibules were often built to serve as airlocks. This intermediate airspace dampened the temperature shock when the doors were opened. The walls of a longhouse were multi-layered, forming a complex sandwich of different materials. The outer layer protected against wind and precipitation, while the inner layer retained heat. Insulation made of moss or wool was often placed between them. This design was more effective than a solid wooden wall. An interesting detail was the absence of large windows, which are the main sources of heat loss. Skylights in the roof were covered with ox bladders, which let light through but retained heat. This was a compromise between lighting and energy efficiency. Every ray of light was valued, but heat was valued even more. The house was modular in design, which made it easy to repair damaged areas. If part of the roof was blown off by the wind, it could be repaired in a single day by the family. This ensured the survivability of the dwelling in the most extreme conditions. The house was a fortress not against enemies, but against the climate. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts. What do you think about this level of engineering in the early Middle Ages? Let me know in the comments. Want to know a secret that will change your idea of choosing a place to live? Vikings never built houses just because the location was beautiful or flat. Choosing a place to settle was a complex, analytical process on which the life of the community depended. They read the terrain the way we read a weather map. The main rule was to use natural shelters from prevailing winds. Houses were placed behind hills or rocky outcrops. This created a wind shadow where the air temperature was several degrees higher. The wind blew over the roofs without blowing the heat out of the walls. The orientation of the houses relative to the cardinal points was strictly calculated. The long axis of the house was usually located from east to west. This allowed maximum use of the sun's heat during the short winter days. The south wall received the most light, heating up and giving off heat inside. They avoided low-lying areas where the coldest and heaviest air accumulated. Construction took place on small hills or slopes. This provided natural drainage and protection from flooding in the spring. Cold air flowed downhill, bypassing residential buildings. The soil under the house was examined for frost penetration and moisture. They knew that wet soil freezes faster and deeper than dry soil. Therefore, they chose sites with sandy or rocky soil for construction. Sometimes it was necessary to create artificial embankments to insulate from the cold ground. The forest around the settlement was never completely cut down. Trees were left as a natural windbreak. The strip of forest trapped snow and reduced wind speed in front of the village. It was the first line of defense against the winter elements. The layout of the houses in the settlement was not chaotic, but followed a collective logic. Buildings were often grouped together to protect each other from the wind. One house served as a shield for another, creating a comfortable environment inside the courtyards. This reduced the overall heat loss of the entire village. Proximity to water was important, but houses were built at a safe distance from the shore. Open water in winter is a source of increased humidity and piercing winds. Therefore, a buffer zone was always left between the sea and the dwellings. Warehouses, boathouses, and workshops were located there. Interestingly, they even took into account the reflection of sunlight from snow and water. Houses were positioned to catch the reflected rays, increasing insulation. It was a primitive but effective method of passive solar heating. Every calorie of heat was collected and preserved. Do you think modern architects take the landscape into account as carefully as ancient builders did?
We must use the hides to insulate the foundations we already have.
Are you ready for the shocking truth about the materials used to build these heat fortresses? We are used to seeing wooden log cabins in movies, but turf was the real salvation from the cold. It was not just a piece of land with grass, but a complex biological composite. Sod blocks were cut from marshy soil, where plant roots created a dense, indestructible structure. Sod walls could reach a thickness of 1.5 meters. Such a mass of earth had enormous thermal inertia. During the day, the walls slowly heated up from the sun and the internal heat of the house. At night, they cooled down just as slowly, releasing the accumulated energy into the room. The root system inside the turf blocks continued to function even after laying. The intertwined roots created millions of air chambers inside the wall. Air is the best heat insulator, and the turf was saturated with it. In terms of its properties, such a wall surpassed modern brick. Laying turf required special skill and knowledge of geometry. The blocks were laid in a herringbone pattern or tied in a special way for strength. This prevented the walls from sliding and the appearance of through gaps. The wall became a monolith, fused with the landscape. A turf roof was the crowning glory of this insulation technology. It weighed tons, but provided perfect waterproofing and thermal protection. The grass on the roof continued to grow, strengthening the structure with its roots. In winter, the snow on such a roof did not melt, which indicated the absence of heat loss. This material was completely free and available anywhere in the northern world. No complex tools or long-distance transportation were required to obtain it. Repairing such a wall consisted of simply replacing damaged blocks. It was architecture that was accessible to everyone, but effective for all. Inside, turf walls were often covered with wood for beauty and comfort. The air gap between the turf and the wooden panel created a thermos effect. The heat from the hearth was reflected by the wood, not escaping into the cold ground. This allowed a comfortable temperature to be maintained even in severe frosts. Turf had another important property. It regulated humidity in the room. The earth absorbed excess moisture, preventing condensation and mold. During dry periods, it released moisture back, maintaining a healthy microclimate. The house literally breathed along with its inhabitants. Even in the event of a fire, the turf walls did not burn, which was critically important. The wooden frame could burn down, but the outer shell remained standing. This made it possible to quickly rebuild the dwelling in its old place. The durability of such buildings is confirmed by archaeological finds. Like this, if you are surprised by the effectiveness of such simple materials as earth and grass. Guess what happened next when architects decided to abandon the chimney? Viking homes did not have the chimneys we are familiar with, which draw smoke outside. The hearth was located right in the center of the living space, on the earthen floor. The smoke rose and accumulated under the high roof, forming a dense cloud. This smoke blanket played a crucial role in retaining heat. The layer of warm smoke blocked the heated air from escaping through the vents. It acted as a plug, trapping precious heat inside the room. At the same time, the lower part of the room remained smoke-free. The absence of a chimney allowed 100% of the heat energy from fuel combustion to be used. The stones surrounding the hearth became red-hot and served as powerful heat accumulators. They continued to heat the house long after the fire had gone out. This was much more efficient than a fireplace, where heat escapes up the chimney. The smoke disinfected the entire interior of the house. It permeated the straw or reed roof, killing insects and parasites. In such a house, there were no wood-eating bugs or rodents. Not only meat was smoked, but also the dwelling itself. Under the influence of smoke, the wood became stronger and more resistant to decay. Soot covered the beams with a protective layer, preserving them for centuries. Many wooden elements found by archaeologists have been preserved thanks to this smokehouse. The house protected itself from destruction by time. The draft was controlled by opening and closing doors or special hatches. The inhabitants masterfully regulated the airflow so that the smoke hung at the right level. This required constant attention and experience. A mistake could lead to the house filling with acrid smoke. Fuel was prepared and dried in advance with great care. Wet wood produced little heat and a lot of heavy, acrid smoke. Certain types of wood were used that burned evenly and hot. Saving fuel was an art of survival. All family life in winter was concentrated around the hearth. It was the brightest and warmest place, where food was prepared and crafts were made. Sleeping places were located along the walls on a raised platform, but below the level of smoke. The boundary between warmth and smoke was the boundary of life. Ash from the hearth was not thrown away but used as insulation. It was used to fill cracks or to create warm floors in sleeping areas. Every byproduct of combustion found its use. The system was completely waste-free. Survival depended on the ability to control this dangerous but necessary element. The question that arises naturally is, how did they cope with the constant smell of smoke and soot? Inside the austere Viking home, in addition to fire, There was another powerful line of defense against the cold: textiles. The walls of the longhouse, made of rough logs or planks, were often hung with bright, woven tapestries and skins. This was done not so much for beauty and comfort as for thermal insulation.
From the eastern peaks
The
to
fabric,
western
hung
sea.
at a distance from the wall,
That is the path
created
we
an
follow.
additional air layer between the icy wood and the living space. This still air acted as an excellent insulator, preventing drafts from entering. The fabrics actually functioned like modern wallpaper with insulation or carpets on the walls. Real warm nests were arranged on wide earthen benches located along the walls and serving as beds. Sleeping on bare boards was cold, so the Vikings created a complex system of bedding. The bottom layer always consisted of elastic coniferous branches or dry straw to insulate from the frozen ground. Sheep, bear, or deer skins were generously thrown on top of this springy base. The winter fur of the reindeer was especially prized for its phenomenal, almost magical heat-insulating properties. The secret lay in the structure of the hairs. Each reindeer hair is hollow inside, like a tube. The air inside the wool created an insurmountable barrier to the cold, acting like a thermos. The woolen clothing of the Scandinavians themselves was a true technological masterpiece of its time. The Vikings used the coarse wool of old northern sheep breeds with a very high lanolin content. Lanolin is a natural animal wax that made the fabric water-repellent and virtually windproof. Such clothing did not get wet under wet snow, and the drops simply rolled off it. The most amazing thing is that even when wet, such oily wool continued to warm the human body, giving off heat. Clothes were always sewn and worn according to the wise principle of layering, which we still use in tourism today. A soft linen undershirt wicking moisture away from the body, keeping the skin dry and clean. Over it was worn a loose-fitting tunic made of thick wool, which retained the air heated by the body. A heavy cloak was thrown over the shoulders, which was a versatile item of clothing. It protected against the wind on the road, and at rest stops it could serve as a warm blanket or tent. Wool felting allowed the creation of dense felt for making shoes and hats. Felt products were unique in that they had no seams through which the icy wind could penetrate. It was an ideal monolithic material for working outdoors in the cold. The Vikings' low valenki or tuni boots were incredibly light, warm, and durable. Particular attention was paid to protecting the extremities, as the hands and feet were the first to freeze. Knitted socks and mittens were used, often worn in several layers. Bundles of dry sedge grass were placed in shoes instead of insoles. This grass absorbed excess sweat while walking and provided additional warmth for the feet. These disposable grass insoles were replaced with fresh ones every day, and the old ones were shaken out. Weaving was a continuous and difficult process throughout the long, dark winter. Women worked day and night to produce kilometers of fabric on vertical looms. Each piece of fabric was a strategic resource for the family's survival and was highly valued. The fabric, called vadmal, was the official currency, the main protection, and a sign of the owner's high status. Sleeping at night under one huge shared fur canopy was the norm even for wealthy families and jarls. People slept huddled together, their backs pressed tightly against each other, combining the warmth of their bodies into a single source. It was not a matter of poverty or cramped quarters, but a matter of rational use of energy. Individualism in winter was an unaffordable and foolish luxury that led to freezing. Even the heavy woolen sails of warships, folded away for the winter, could be used in everyday life. They were often used to partition off large spaces in longhouses, creating small, warm areas for sleeping. Any piece of thick fabric became a tool for zoning the climate inside a huge hall. Such flexibility of space helped to significantly save firewood by heating only the living areas. Clothing and textiles were not just things for the Vikings, but literally a second skin for people and homes. They created a personal, portable microclimate that people always carried with them. Without this high level of skill in processing wool and flax, the Viking expansion to the north would have been physically impossible. Sheep conquered the northern seas on a par with warriors. Are you ready to learn the truth about how northern peoples managed to keep food fresh without a single watt of electricity? The Vikings and their neighbors underwent a mental revolution, turning their main natural enemy, the deadly frost, into the main keeper of their supplies. For them, winter was not just a season of survival, but a giant free refrigerator that worked without interruptions or breakdowns. They developed unique biotechnologies for preservation, allowing perishable products to be stored for years and even decades. The main and most widespread invention was drying fish in the icy sea wind. Huge catches of Atlantic cod were gutted and hung in pairs on giant wooden frames, standing right on the seashore. These structures were called yell and were exposed to all winds. The cold, dry winter air gradually drew all the moisture out of the fish, preventing it from rotting. The result was a product as hard as wood, known as stockfish. In this dehydrated state, the fish retained all its nutrients and protein, remaining unspoiled for years at room temperature. To eat such fish, it had to be beaten with a hammer for a long time, turning it back into fibers. The meat of domestic and wild animals was also preserved using cold smoking and drying methods. The thick, acrid smoke from an open hearth in a longhouse was not wasted, but used for preservation. Rows of hams and sausages always hung from the ceiling of the dwelling. The process was slow but sure. The smoke impregnated the meat with natural antiseptic substances, killing bacteria, and the heat dried the fibers. This was an inviolable strategic reserve of pure protein in case of unsuccessful hunting or a long siege. The Vikings preserved fermented milk products, which usually spoil within days, in special wooden barrels. These barrels were often sunk in peat bogs or icy streams. The icy water maintained a constant low temperature, acting as a thermostat. This prevented the product from souring completely, or conversely, freezing into ice and losing its structure. This is how the famous skyr was made, a very thick, sour yogurt that could be stored all winter. For children and the elderly, it was an indispensable source of calcium and vitamins during the dark season. Precious grain was stored in special barns, raised above the ground on pillars. These pillars had a clever engineering solution. Their tops were covered with wide, smooth, mushroom-shaped stones. This made it impossible for mice and rats to get inside the storage facility. Ventilation in such granaries was thought out to the smallest detail, so that the grain was aired and did not rot from dampness. The frosty air, circulating freely under the wooden floor, froze the supplies through and through. This killed the larvae of weevils, ensuring biological safety. Fermentation was another risky but effective way to outsmart nature. Greenland sharks, whose meat was poisonous and saturated with ammonia when fresh, were not discarded. They were buried in the ground under a stone press and left to ferment for several months. The cold slowed down the rotting process, turning it into a controlled fermentation that neutralized the toxins. This is how Hakar was made, an incredibly smelly, distinctive, but nutritious delicacy that saved people from starvation. It was an example of how knowledge of chemistry helped to use any resource. Earth cellars were used for long-term storage of root vegetables such as turnips, carrots, and cabbage. A thick layer of earth, turf, and snow on top created a zone of stable temperature just above 0 degrees. This prevented the vegetable cell sap from freezing. The vegetables remained fresh and crisp until spring, saving people from scurvy and tooth loss. The engineers who built these cellars were well versed in soil thermodynamics. Glaciers high in the mountains were used as natural freezers in the summer to store game.
We must store these last crates.
But in winter, the whole world around them became one big freezer. Food was simply taken out to an unheated outbuilding or cage, where it instantly froze solid. The main task was simply to protect it from the sharp teeth of wild animals such as wolverines and foxes. Salt, which was evaporated from seawater with great difficulty or purchased from merchants, was literally worth its weight in gold. Salting meat and fish in barrels made it possible to create the most reliable, untouchable supply for long journeys. Salted food also helped to retain water in the body. This was critically important during hard physical work in the cold to avoid dehydration. Using the cold instead of fighting it senselessly was a brilliant adaptation by northern people. But how did they solve the delicate problem of hygiene when all the water around them turned to ice? In the next chapter, you will learn how the Vikings coped with cleanliness in this terrible weather. An ancient Viking settlement functioned not simply as a group of houses, but as a single complex energy system, where each element supported the existence of the others. Houses in such villages never stood isolated from each other, unless it was a remote farmstead belonging to an outcast. The dense, crowded construction significantly reduced the total area of exterior walls exposed to the icy wind. The buildings were arranged so that they created wind shadows and a common thermal pocket for each other. Neighbors covered each other with their backs, forming a single defensive redoubt against the cold. Very narrow paths were specially laid between the houses and dug deep into the ground. In winter, when deep snow fell, these paths turned into real deep tunnels with high walls. The snow walls on either side of the paths reliably protected the walker from the piercing wind. Moving around the winter village was like moving inside a huge white maze or anthill. Up above, a blizzard could be raging, but down below, on the path, it was quiet and relatively warm. This significantly reduced the risk of hypothermia when moving from house to house or to the well. The fences and wattle fences around the estates not only served a protective function, but also an important snow retention function. They acted as aerodynamic screens, causing snow to pile up in high drifts in strictly defined places. These artificial drifts provided additional insulation for the exterior walls of houses, working on the principle of a needle. The clever placement of fences allowed wind currents to be controlled so that passageways and doors remained clear of drifts. Snow was a free building material for the Vikings, which they controlled with the help of the wind. Livestock was often kept in the same longhouse where people lived, simply in a separate section behind a partition. The warmth from the breath and massive bodies of cows, sheep, and goats raised the overall temperature in the living quarters by several precious degrees. The animals functioned as powerful living heating batteries operating around the clock. This forced symbiosis was beneficial both to the people, who received warmth, and to the livestock, which did not freeze in a separate barn. The specific smell did not bother anyone, as it was the smell of life and warmth. Craft workshops, such as smithies or bakeries, were strategically located so that their excess heat would not go to waste. Often, the smithy was adjacent to residential buildings or located in the center of the production area of the courtyard. The hot air from the forge created a comfortable temperature for working outside, even in freezing weather. The heat from any production was used as fully as possible to heat neighboring buildings. Wasting heat was considered the height of mismanagement. General meetings and councils were held in the largest halls of the leaders, the honey halls. Hundreds of people, tightly packed in one closed room, quickly heated it with their breath and body heat. Noisy feasts were not only a social ritual and drunkenness, but also an effective way of collective heating. No one lived in cramped and uncomfortable conditions in winter, as cramped conditions meant warmth. The more people crowded into the hall, the less firewood was needed to maintain a comfortable temperature. The system of notification and mutual assistance within the settlement was fine-tuned to the point of automatism. If one house suddenly ran out of firewood or something happened to the breadwinner, the neighbors knew about it instantly. The survival of the entire community was always placed above the concept of private property or personal grievances. A lone person in the winter forest was doomed to a quick death, and everyone knew it. Clearing snow after blizzards was a collective responsibility, often turned into a fun competition between men. The men cleared the roads with shovels, maintaining their physical fitness and fighting spirit. It was a necessary and useful physical activity during the forced winter idleness. Hard work in the cold warmed the blood better than any fire and prevented the muscles from atrophying. Psychological support in a close-knit community was no less important than physical warmth. People constantly lived in full view of each other, which prevented the development of severe winter depression. Common tasks, games, and rituals strongly bonded the social fabric of the tribe, preventing people from becoming wild with longing in the darkness of the polar night. The village was a single living organism, not only physically but also mentally. If one part was sick, the whole organism suffered. This unique settlement structure was the result of centuries of brutal selection of the most effective engineering solutions. Any mistakes in planning in the past cost the lives of entire generations of unsuccessful builders. Those who survived and left offspring passed on to us the ideal, refined scheme of winter communal living. Contrary to widespread Hollywood myths about dirty and unwashed barbarians, the historical truth is that the Vikings were perhaps the most cleanly people in all of medieval Europe. Strict winter hygiene was literally a matter of life and death for them, not just a matter of aesthetics or pleasant smell. The Northerners were well aware of the physics of cold. Dirty skin and clothing covered in sebum instantly lose their insulating properties. Fat sticks the fibers of wool together and clogs the pores of the skin, disrupting natural thermoregulation. In order not to freeze in the bitter cold, a person had to be perfectly clean. The bathhouse, or sauna, was the undisputed center of sanitary and social life in any Scandinavian settlement. It was a special separate building, standing apart from residential houses, which was heated to extremely high temperatures. In the center was a stove, where red-hot stones were generously doused with water, creating thick, hot steam. This humid heat allowed the body to warm up deeply to the bones and cleanse the pores of dirt and toxins. People sat there for hours, driving out the cold accumulated during a week of work in the wind. The famous contrast treatments with a sharp dive into a snowdrift or an icy hole in the ice were not madness, but a powerful method of hardening the body. The sharp, shocking change in temperature caused the blood vessels to constrict and expand, training the cardiovascular system like a muscle. Those who regularly bathed and jumped into the snow were much less likely to suffer from colds and pneumonia. In the absence of antibiotics and modern medicine, this was the most powerful and effective prevention of disease. A Viking's immunity was his invisible armor. Not only did people wash themselves in the bathhouse, but they also regularly washed their clothes in boiling water. They understood that only clean and fluffy wool could retain warm air and keep the body warm. Washing clothes in winter was an incredibly laborious and difficult process for women. It required the preparation of a huge amount of firewood and the delivery of hundreds of liters of water, which had to be heated. But no one in the community neglected this hard work for the sake of keeping warm. A dirty shirt could cause hypothermia while hunting. Women boiled and used lye from wood ash as a universal soap and shampoo. It was a rather aggressive chemical, but it effectively killed all skin parasites and broke down any grease. Lice and fleas were carriers of disease and were fought mercilessly. Hair and beards were carefully combed with bone combs every day to keep them looking neat. Personal care was an integral part of the daily morning routine of any free man. Saturday in modern Scandinavian languages is still called bath day or lørdag. This ancient linguistic custom has its roots in the Viking era and their daily routine. Once a week, usually at the end of the working week, absolutely all residents of the settlement underwent a deep cleansing procedure. It was an inviolable law of the ancestors, observed by both konungs and ordinary community members. The bathhouse also served as an improvised maternity ward and infirmary for the wounded. It was objectively the cleanest, warmest, and practically sterile place in the entire village, thanks to the high temperatures and smoke. Here, healers treated seriously ill patients, set dislocations, and delivered babies. The invigorating heat and steam were the main remedies for many ailments of the time. Washing with ice-cold water from a basin in the morning was a mandatory ritual of awakening for both men and women. It helped them wake up instantly on dark and cold winter mornings during the polar night. The ice-cold water toned the skin and invigorated the spirit before the start of a hard day. The Vikings were proud of their ability to stoically endure the cold and ice-cold water. Physical cleanliness in their culture was considered a sure sign of inner strength and human dignity. Archaeologists find a huge number of skillfully made tweezers, ear picks, nail spoons, and combs in burials. These personal hygiene items were valued by their owners as much as weapons and expensive jewelry. For a Viking, being dirty, shaggy, and smelly meant sinking to the bottom of society and losing one's human dignity. The entire hygiene system was tightly integrated into the overall survival strategy of the people of the North. A clean body, clean, dry clothes, and a hardened spirit were the three pillars of northern health. The bathhouse was the sacred place where the cold suffered a crushing defeat in its battle with man. For the Scandinavian settlements of the Viking Age, the harsh winter was never a time of lethargic sleep or passive waiting for warmth. On the contrary, it was a period of intense concentration and vigorous craft production, transferred from the fields to indoors. People understood perfectly well that long periods of immobility in the cold meant certain death, so hard work was the best way to keep warm. Long, dark winter evenings, when the sun barely rose above the horizon, turned homes into noisy and productive workshops. The space around the hearth became the center of the universe, where life was bustling and material values were created. Men devoted their free time from hunting to intricate carving of wood, walrus bone, and deer antler. They carefully repaired weapons damaged over the summer and mended agricultural tools. Creating the most famous intricate patterns on the bow of a warship required months of painstaking work by a carver. Winter gave the craftsmen the time and peace they needed to create the true masterpieces of art that we admire in museums today. Every item, whether it was a knife handle or a comb, was made with care, soul, and deep, sacred meaning. Women tirelessly spun yarn, wove cloth, and sewed warm, multi-layered clothing for the whole family for the year ahead. The monotonous clatter of the vertical loom was the main rhythm of winter life in every longhouse, continuing late into the night.
It is very vibrant.
Making one large woolen sail for a draka was a titanic task that could take several experienced craftswomen the entire winter. It was the most important strategic contribution women made to their husbands' future summer voyages and trading expeditions. The heavy and hot work with metal in the smithy did not stop for a single day, regardless of the frost. The hellish heat of the coal furnace and the considerable physical efforts of the blacksmith made the smithy the warmest and most attractive place in the settlement. It was in winter that sharp swords, reliable axes, and thousands of iron rivets for shipbuilding were forged in huge quantities. A large stockpile of high-quality metal products gave the clan an undeniable economic and military advantage in the spring. The manufacture of skis and sleds was not a pastime, but a harsh seasonal necessity for traveling through deep snow. The Vikings were excellent skiers, and widely used skis of various lengths for successful winter hunting and reconnaissance. Experienced craftsmen spent a long time selecting suitable wood, bending it over hot steam, and carefully tarring the sliding surface. At that time, good, fast skis were valued by warriors no less than a good war horse. The training of young people in complex crafts and traditions took place during these long winter months. Senior craftsmen and warriors passed on the secrets of their craft to the younger generation, sitting shoulder to shoulder by the hearth. It was a real school of life, where any theory was immediately reinforced by practice. The precious knowledge of the ancestors was carefully preserved and multiplied during these dark months, ensuring the continuity of generations. Preparations for the spring sowing campaign and sea raids began long before the snow actually melted. The men carefully sorted the seed grain, repaired fishing nets, and caulked boats in the boathouses. Strategic planning for future military operations and trade routes was in full swing during evening councils. Winter was a time for global strategy and accumulating resources for a breakthrough. The necessary physical activity inside the cramped house was maintained by various games and strength competitions. Traditional glimmer wrestling, tug-of-war, and complex board games such as Orno Fat Fla helped to stretch stiff muscles and minds. Boredom and despondency were as dangerous an enemy to a closed community as the bitter cold outside the walls. An active brain and a strong warrior's body required constant exercise and training of reflexes. Even the elderly and young children were involved in the continuous work of the family. Shearing wool, handing tools to craftsmen, tending the fire. There was a feasible and important task for every member of the community. The feeling of being needed and constantly busy kept people's spirits high. No one felt like a burden or an extra mouth to feed, as everyone contributed to survival. Hard work turned the forced winter confinement into the most productive period of the year. Winter was a time of creation for the unique material culture of the North. It was in the cold and darkness that the harsh beauty and quality that adorned the lives of the Vikings was born. For the Scandinavian peoples, the long-awaited end of winter was not just a formal change of the calendar season. It was a real, hard-won celebration of survival, comparable to victory in a great war. People who had gone through long months of endless darkness, cold and isolation greeted the first spring sun as a living deity. They understood that their lives had hung in the balance, and now the danger had receded for another year. But this victory over the fierce winter was forged not only by sharp axes and the heat of the hearth. It was forged by the unyielding strength of spirit and iron will of every member of the community. Psychological resilience was the invisible foundation on which the entire survival system rested. Ancient sagas and heroic legends, told in quiet voices by the nighttime hearth, were a powerful tool for unity. Stories of mighty gods and fearless heroes reminded weary people that any difficulty could be overcome. These tales connected the living with their ancestors, giving them the feeling that they were not alone in the darkness. The loud and confident voice of the skald dispelled the thick darkness and the clinging fear of the unknown polar night. Culture and oral tradition served as a reliable mental shield against madness and depression. Yule, the famous winter solstice festival, was the culmination of this spiritual struggle against darkness. Noisy feasts, abundant sacrifices, and unrestrained merriment in the midst of the harshest winter demonstrated man's contempt for death. People brought out their best supplies, ate, drank, and laughed in the face of the frost outside the walls. It was an important act of collective self-affirmation and magic, designed to turn the wheel of the year toward the light. A deep belief in fate and fatalism, inherent in the Viking mentality, helped them to calmly accept the inevitable. They believed that the thread of each person's life was already woven by the wise Norns at birth. If a warrior was destined to freeze to death that winter, then so be it, as the higher powers had decided, and there was nothing to fear. But as long as the blood was hot and the heart was beating, one had to fight to the very end without giving up. This philosophical and calm attitude towards death made them practically invincible in any circumstances. With the first timid rays of the spring sun, the settlement instantly came to life, filling with new, vibrant energy. The heavy doors of the houses swung wide open, letting out the stale air. The cattle, emaciated from the winter, were finally taken out into the street, and the animals joyfully breathed in the fresh wind. Warships were solemnly launched, preparing for new campaigns and trading expeditions. The people who survived the winter felt literally reborn and full of strength. Every year survived in these latitudes was perceived as a personal and collective great victory. The legacy of this 1,000-year struggle with winter lives on in the famous Scandinavian architecture and design to this day. The famous coziness, extreme functionality, love of warm wood and natural materials, all this comes from those smoky longhouses. The Vikings were the first to teach the rest of the world to love and respect the harsh north, finding beauty in it. They proved that humans can not only survive, but thrive where nature says no. It was an unconditional victory of human intelligence, willpower, and brilliant organization. Winter was incredibly harsh and unforgiving, but people proved to be more cunning, inventive, and persistent than the elements. The history of Viking settlements is the best textbook on adaptation for all of humanity. They did not try to change nature to suit themselves. They changed themselves and their way of life to suit nature, and that was their greatest wisdom in life. We have seen that behind the brutal image of a warrior with an axe lay a thoughtful engineer and a thrifty master. The Vikings created a unique civilization capable of thriving on the edge of the inhabited world. Their homes, clothing, and social structure were all part of a single machine for producing and conserving heat. The layout of the streets, the shape of the roofs, the use of turf and smoke, no detail was accidental. It was a triumph of practical reason over harsh reality. They showed us that comfort is possible even in an icy hell if you apply your mind and hands to it. Which of these ancient survival technologies do you think could be useful to us today, in an era of ecological crisis? Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new journeys into the past.